Hey 7th graders, it's Mrs. Speak. This assignment is going to be taking notes based off of my lecture. So the first thing you need to do is open up the digital interactive notebook, and it should look like this. All right, here we go. Here's my presentation, and you guys are entering notes as I'm talking. So the first thing you're going to enter is on the timeline. The first one is King Menes reigned during this time and united Upper and Lower Egypt, and that was 3100 BC. The next one is 3000 BC, and during this time hieroglyphics emerged around 3000 BC. The next one is 2686 BC to 2181 BC, and this is when the Old Kingdom began and lasted until 2181 BC. The next one is the construction of the pyramids began during the Old Kingdom. 2025 BC is the Middle Kingdom began, and it lasted until 1782 BC. In 1690 BC, the Middle Kingdom ended and the Hyksos invaded Egypt with their war chariots. They ruled for about 100 years. We'll be talking about most of this stuff in detail coming up. This next one is the New Kingdom began and lasted until approximately 1070 BC. The New Kingdom is when we have the great pharaohs like Ramses. And the last one is 1503 to 1482 BC. Hatshepsut reigned during the New Kingdom. We'll talk about her. She was a female pharaoh. Okay, the next slide you have is society in ancient Egypt. So let's talk about the social hierarchy. At the very top were the pharaohs. They were the rulers of Egypt who acted as a god. They were given authority by the gods. The viziers, priests, and nobles were next, and they are the highest officials that work under the pharaoh. The scribes are next. They had great knowledge of reading and writing. Their jobs were to write and copy hieroglyphic and hieratic scripts. They were considered the upper or the middle class. If you remember anything about the social hierarchy of Mesopotamia, the scribes were about the same, right in the middle, but still considered upper class. Merchants and craftspeople were middle class workers. They lived in the villages comfortably but were not wealthy. And the peasants and servants, they farmed on the land of the estates, mostly for the pharaoh. They paid taxes in the form of crops to the pharaoh, and they worked on building projects such as the pyramids. This question up here says, in the social hierarchy, which groups were most educated and why? And I believe your next slide of your assignment, you're going to have to answer that. And this one says the upper hierarchy groups, especially scribes, because their job involves attending a special school to learn how to read and write hieroglyphic and hieratic script. Okay, so they had to go to school. These scribes had to go to school, just like in Mesopotamia, in order to know how to do it. Although in Mesopotamia they were writing in cuneiform, and here in Egypt they're writing in hieroglyphics. All right, next let's talk about influential pharaohs and rulers. This one is King Menes. I told you in class how he had this funny looking hat, white and red with this swirly thing, and that represents Lower and Upper Egypt. He was King Menes. The first royal dynasty was created under Menes, and he merged Upper and Lower Egypt together and ruled. Next over here we have Ramses II. He defeated the Hittites in the Battle of Kadesh. He was one of the most powerful pharaohs. His queen was Nefertiti. Next was Tutankhamun, and we will study him more this week. In fact, that's your assignment for this week, is to see how did he die? Was he murdered? Or did he die of natural causes? Was it an accident? Anyway, Tutankhamun was well known for his well-preserved tomb within the Valley of the Kings. Little is known about his reign. And I told a story in class how in the 1920s they were looking for his tomb, and they were looking all around, and finally someone found a step in the sand, and so they brushed off the step, and then they ended up finding steps down into his tomb. And you guys will get to watch the video of them finding his tomb this week. Next was Hatshepsut, and that was a female pharaoh. She was the first woman to become pharaoh. She was a very successful pharaoh, and Egypt prospered during her reign. She was the daughter of Thutmose I, And Hatshepsut wanted to be known as great as a king, and so she had all of her statues rendered her as a male. She had this beard like this on this other Thutmose pharaoh. She had a beard added to all of her statues because she wanted to be known as great as a king. The next one down here is Thutmose III. He was the nephew of Hatshepsut. He was viewed as a warrior king and won famous battles, and Egypt expanded westward under his reign. And last, Akhenaten. He only worshipped one god, the sun god Ra. When he came into power, he closed the other temples and shrines. He caused much destruction during his reign. You could say that in a land of polytheism, this guy was trying to worship only one god and make his people worship only one god, which we call monotheism. All right, next slide is the three kingdoms. I hope you guys are writing all this down. All right, in the Old Kingdom, and you know the dates already from your timeline, Egypt had their very first dynasty. Memphis was made the capital of the kingdom. They built their famous pyramids during this time. The Middle Kingdom, they conquered Nubia, which was located south of Egypt, and art and literature was also flourishing during the Middle Kingdom. Last, the New Kingdom, the period of expansion and prosperity. The rulers during this time were more powerful and effective, such as Hatshepsut. Next, the Pyramids of Giza. The pyramids contained tombs for the pharaohs who passed away. They believed in preserving the body for the afterlife. Pyramids were tombs. They were not large rooms on the inside. There were tunnels and tombs, and that was it. And we will study pyramids either next week or the next. The Ka, that was one of your vocabulary words, is the spiritual body of a human being. It lives beyond death and into the afterlife. We would call that today the spirit. All right, I think this is the last slide. The Hyksos, they invaded and ruled Egypt. But what did the Egyptians learn from the Hyksos? Well, they used their war chariots. They learned to use bronze while making weapons and tools for farming. And they mastered military skills. So it wasn't a bad thing. That was in between the Middle and the New Kingdom, is when they invaded and ruled, but then Egypt invaded them as well and took that control. And last is Hatshepsut, and we talked about her already a little bit, but she was the first woman to become pharaoh, and she ruled in that New Kingdom after the Hyksos. She was the daughter of King Thutmose I. And again, the New Kingdom was a time of expansion and prosperity because she was such an effective and powerful female ruler. Okay, that's it. Hopefully you got some good notes. Please finish it up, turn in this assignment, and I will see you guys later. Have a great week. Bye-bye.